12 executives walked out of my safety presentation while I was speaking, leaving me talking to an empty room. They thought humiliating me would bury their dangerous secrets. Instead, they walked straight into a federal trap I'd been building for weeks. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious, where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. It was 6 in the morning, and the gray fog of an Indiana autumn was clinging to the asphalt of the company parking lot. I sat in the driver's seat of my 10-year-old sedan, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, trying to force the acid in my stomach to settle. I hadn't slept in 3 days, not really. Maybe an hour here or there, interrupted by nightmares of pressure valves bursting and monitors flatlining. The stress had manifested physically, a constant, dull thrumming behind my eyes and a tightness in my chest that felt like a vice. I reached for the thermos of black coffee in the cup holder, my movements slow and heavy. I was vulnerable, exhausted, and feeling older than my 48 years. That was when I saw her. Nadia, the senior technician who had been my only ally in this snake pit, tapped frantically on my passenger window. She looked terrifyingly pale, her eyes darting around the empty lot as if she expected a sniper on the roof. I unlocked the door and she practically fell into the seat. "Mark, you can't go in there," she whispered, her voice trembling so hard the words barely formed. "I just heard Baxter in the hallway. They know about the report. They aren't just going to fire you, they're going to destroy you. They have a script ready, Mark. They're going to call you unstable, incompetent. They're going to blacklist you from the entire industry." I stared at her, the exhaustion momentarily replaced by a cold shock. I knew they were corrupt, but the level of calculated malice took the wind out of me. "They're going to let me present?" I asked, my voice raspy. "That's the trap," she said, tears forming in her eyes. "They want you to stand up there so they can walk out on you. It's theater, Mark. They want to break you publicly so no one will believe a word you say later." The betrayal hit me harder than the physical exhaustion. I had come here to save lives, to fix machines that kept people alive, and the people who hired me were plotting my professional execution before I'd even finished my morning coffee. I walked into the boardroom 20 minutes later. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back, cold and uncomfortable under my shirt. The room was expansive, dominated by a massive, shiny oak table that cost more than my first house. The air smelled of expensive cologne and ozone from the laser projector. I stood at the head of the table, my laptop open, the blue light of the screen casting long shadows across the floor. Slowly, the executives filed in, 12 of them. The dirty dozen, I called them in my head. They didn't look at me, they didn't nod. They simply took their seats, opening leather-bound notebooks and checking their watches with an air of bored arrogance. I began, "Good morning. I'm here to discuss critical failures in the Series 9 pressure valves currently shipping to pediatric trauma centers." I was 3 slides in, showing a graph of a catastrophic load failure when the room shifted. It was subtle at first, a glance shared between the CFO and the VP of operations. Then it happened. 12 executives in tailored suits stood up at once. It was synchronized, perfect, like a robotic routine they had rehearsed in front of a mirror. I kept talking, my voice wavering slightly, thinking maybe it was a stretch break or some bizarre boardroom tradition I didn't know. But then Baxter, the COO, stepped directly in front of the projector lens. The bright light hit his back, casting him in silhouette and blocking my data on the screen. "This meeting is over," he said, his voice flat and bored. "We're not wasting another second on this nonsense." He didn't even look me in the eye, he just turned and walked out. The rest followed without a word, not a single glance in my direction. Just the sound of expensive leather chairs creaking, high heels clicking on the hardwood, and the heavy thud of the double doors opening. Vivian, the VP of Ops, was the last to leave. She paused at the door, turning to me with that little fake, pitying smile she always wore during damage control meetings. "Some people just aren't built for executive environments, Mark," she said, shrugging as if I'd forgotten to bring donuts instead of reporting federal-level compliance violations. "Don't worry, we'll mail you your things." Monroe, the CFO, reached for the wall switch. He flipped the lights off, plunging me into darkness. "No on." "E is going to read your report," he called out from the hallway. "Save yourself the time." Then they were gone. I stood in the dark, the projector still glowing, casting red and yellow warning symbols across the empty chairs. My chest was tight, but the fear was gone. In its place was a cold, hard clarity. They thought they had won. They thought this was the end of the story. But as I reached into my jacket pocket and felt the small, warm plastic of the device humming there, I knew they had forgotten one crucial thing. They assumed I was playing by their rules. They had no idea I had rewritten the game entirely. I stood there in the silence for a moment, listening to the hum of the HVAC vents. It reminded me of home. I'm from Granger, Indiana. I grew up watching my dad work graveyard shifts in a paper mill. He'd come home with chemical burns on his arms and rust in his teeth, too tired to speak, but he never cut a corner. If you build it wrong, he used to tell me, someone pays for it. Maybe not today, maybe not you, but someone pays. I started as a line worker just like him. I moved into inspection, got certified, and built a reputation for fixing bad processes without playing politics. I wasn't flashy. I didn't care about stock options or company retreats. I cared that the equipment we built didn't kill the people it was supposed to save. That's what Baxter had used to reel me in. I remembered my interview with him 3 months ago. Baxter was a man who looked like he had been manufactured, not born, perfect teeth, perfectly graying hair, and a suit that cost more than my car. He sat in his corner office, sipping something amber from a crystal glass at 10:00 a.m., looking out over the industrial park like a king surveying his peasants. "You've got integrity, Mark," he had said, flashing a smile that didn't reach his cold, shark-like eyes. "And no baggage, that's rare. We don't need fireworks here. We just need someone who can tidy up a few process kinks. The last guy, well, he had health issues, couldn't handle the pace." I learned later that health issues was code for a nervous breakdown induced by Baxter's bullying. Baxter was the kind of man who viewed safety regulations as suggestions and ethics as a weakness. He constantly made subtle, digging comments about my background. He'd ask about my quaint life in Granger or make jokes about how I probably preferred beer to the scotch he offered. He was obsessed with appearances and assets. He'd often lean over my desk, looking not at my reports but at the photos of my family, asking invasive questions about my mortgage or my retirement savings, gauging exactly how desperate I was for the paycheck. "You need this job, don't you, Mark?" he'd say, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Let's not make things difficult. Just sign the papers and let the boys in sales do their thing." He thought he was buying my silence. He thought a salary bump and a fancy title would make me ignore the cracked valves and the falsified stress tests. He saw a man from a small town and assumed I was small-minded. Standing in the dark boardroom, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway, I realized just how wrong he was. He thought he was the predator. He didn't realize he had just locked himself in a cage with the one man who knew exactly how to dismantle his entire world. I didn't head back to my office immediately. I took the stairs down from the boardroom two at a time, the adrenaline finally overriding the exhaustion. I walked straight out the side entrance into the crisp morning air. I lit a cigarette, a habit I thought I'd kicked years ago but had picked up again 2 weeks into this job, and stared at the security fence while the steam from the HVAC vents rose into the gray sky like nothing had happened. My chest wasn't tight from embarrassment anymore. It was tight from anticipation. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the contact named Eliza. She was my contact at the Federal Oversight Office, a connection I'd made years ago during a compliance seminar, back when I thought regulations were just paperwork and not a lifeline. I had reached out to her 6 weeks ago when the first red flags appeared. "I hit dial," she answered on the second ring. "Mark," her voice was sharp, professional. "Did it happen?" "It went exactly how you said it would," I told her, watching a security guard patrol the perimeter. "All of it. The coordinated walkout, the refusal to look at the data, the explicit statement that they weren't going to waste time on safety warnings." "Did you get it?" she asked. I patted the breast pocket of my jacket. "Crystal clear. I've been recording since I walked into the building this morning. I have Baxter on tape saying the meeting is over before I could even show the critical failure rates. I have Monroe saying no one will read the report. They just handed us willful negligence on a silver plat." "A turn." "Good," Eliza said. "That establishes intent. They can't claim ignorance if they actively refuse to hear the warning. Hold tight, Mark. We're moving up the timeline. Do not let them isolate you." I hung up and threw the cigarette to the ground, crushing it under my heel. The clever trap wasn't the presentation itself. The presentation was the bait. I knew they wouldn't listen. I needed them to demonstrate why they wouldn't listen. I needed a recorded act of them choosing profit over public safety in real time. I walked back inside, but I didn't go to the elevators. I made a detour to my car first. I popped the trunk and pulled out a rugged, encrypted hard drive from the spare tire well. This was my insurance. For the last 10 weeks, every time I found a discrepancy, a manipulated test log, a deleted email, a photo of a cracked seal, I made a copy. I hadn't just been tidying up processes, I had been building a forensic mirror of their entire corrupt operation. They thought I was a line worker turned manager who was in over his head. They didn't know I spent my nights cross-referencing timestamps and recovering lost data packets. I was ready. I walked into my office and Vivian was already there. She was standing by the window, looking out at the parking lot, her silhouette framed by the gray light. She didn't turn around right away. "You made quite the impression this morning, Mark," she said, her tone dripping with mock disappointment. I shut the door behind me, the latch clicking loudly in the silence. She finally faced me holding a manila folder. My name was stamped across the top in red ink. "You're done here," she said, dropping the folder onto my desk. It landed with a heavy thwap that echoed in the small room. "Effective immediately, your badge is deactivated, email access revoked. Security is on their way to escort you out. We're framing this as a restructuring due to your inability to adapt to corporate culture." She was waiting for me to beg. She wanted to see the panic, the realization that my career was over. She wanted to see the man from Granger, Indiana, crumble under the weight of her authority. Instead, I walked past her, sat in my chair, and calmly opened the bottom drawer of my desk. "You hired the wrong guy, Vivian," I said quietly, reaching under the drawer's lip to peel off the strip of tape holding my backup recorder. The one I kept running in the office 24/7. "We hired a fixer," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. "We didn't realize you were incompetent." "No," I said, looking up at her, my hand closing around the small black device. "You hired a man who knows the difference between a bad weld and a crime scene. You thought because I didn't go to Ivy League schools that I wouldn't notice you were changing the failure criteria mid-cycle. You thought I wouldn't notice that the stress tests were being run on dummy units." Vivian laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "You're delusional. Who are you going to tell? The board? They just walked out on you. The press? We have a legal team that will bury you in litigation before you can type a tweet. You're nobody, Mark. You're a liability we just wrote off." I stood up holding the recorder in plain sight. Her eyes flicked to it, and for the first time the mask slipped. A flicker of genuine confusion crossed her face. "I'm not the one you should be worried about," I said, slipping the device into my pocket next to the other one. "And as for my future employment, I don't think I'll be needing a reference from you where I'm going." "Is that a threat?" she hissed, stepping closer. "Because let me be clear, people in this world don't forget betrayal. You walk out that door with anything that belongs to this company, and we will prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law." "I'm counting on it," I said. I didn't pack a box. I didn't take the stapler or the framed photo of the dog. I took only what mattered, the drives, the recorders, and the notebook I kept in my inside pocket. I walked out of the office, leaving Vivian standing there fuming. In the hallway, Nadia was pacing. She looked like she was about to be sick. When she saw me, she rushed over, grabbing my arm. "They're scrubbing the servers," she whispered, her voice a frantic hiss. "I just saw IT running a batch delete on the archive drive. They're erasing the original test logs, Mark. If they delete those, it's your word against theirs. They'll say you forged your data." The stakes had just skyrocketed. If they destroyed the source material, my copies would be harder to authenticate. They were burning the evidence while the body was still warm. "Let them try," I said, keeping my voice steady to calm her down. "It's too late." "You don't understand," she cried, gripping my sleeve. "Baxter is already on the phone with his contacts at the industry regulator. He's poisoning the well. He's telling them a disgruntled employee tampered with the equipment." We reached the lobby. It was massive, glass-walled, and intimidating, designed to make you feel small. And right there, waiting for me by the security turnstiles, was Baxter. He wasn't alone. He had two large security guards with him. "Sterling," he barked, his voice echoing off the marble floors. "I explicitly told security to throw you out the moment you left that boardroom." He marched toward me, his face red with a mix of anger and adrenaline. He looked powerful here in his domain. The receptionist stopped typing. People froze in the middle of the lobby. "Hand over the bag," Baxter demanded, pointing at my laptop satchel. "That is company property. You are stealing trade secrets." "I'm taking my personal effects," I said, gripping the strap. "Seize him," Baxter ordered the guards. The guards stepped forward, reaching for me. Nadia gasped, stepping back. That was the moment the revolving doors at the front of the lobby spun open. It wasn't just one person. It was a wave. Eliza walked in first, wearing a black blazer and a lanyard that definitely wasn't a visitor pass. Behind her were 6 agents in windbreakers that read federal oversight in bold yellow letters. 2 of them were carrying heavy Pelican cases, forensic data retrieval units. Federal agents, nobody move. Eliza's voice cut through the lobby like a whip crack. The security guards froze, their hands inches from my arms. Baxter spun around, his mouth falling open. "What is the meaning of this?" Baxter stammered, his bluster evaporating instantly. "This is private property, you have no jurisdiction." Eliza didn't even slow down. She walked right up to Baxter, flashing a badge that caught the overhead lights. "We have a warrant for the seizure of all digital and physical records regarding the Series 9 production line," she said, her voice cool and lethal. "And we have a warrant for the immediate detainment of key personnel for questioning." Baxter pointed a shaking finger at me. "This man is a thief, he's a disgruntled." "This man," Eliza interrupted, stepping between us and placing a hand on my shoulder, "is a federally protected whistleblower. And if you say one more word to him, I will add witness intimidation to the list of charges I'm already drafting." Baxter looked at me. For the first time, I saw the fear. He looked at the agents fanning out toward the elevators, toward the server room, toward the evidence he was trying to delete. "Mark," Eliza said, turning to me, "we've set up a temporary command post in the old R&D wing. I need you to walk us through the file structure before they manage to corrupt the backups. Can you do that?" I looked at Baxter, whose face had drained of all color. I adjusted my jacket, feeling the weight of the recorders in my pocket. "Absolutely," I said, "let's get to work." They brought me into the boardroom through the back service hallway the next morning. It was just after 7:00 a.m., but the building was already buzzing with a frantic, terrified energy. Half the people in the executive wing were running on caffeine and panic. I stepped into the room. It was a full house, board members, high-priced attorneys, and the few executives who hadn't lawyered up and fled yet. But the atmosphere was different today. There was no arrogance, no checking watches. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and fear. Edmund Grant, the chairman of the board, sat at the head of the table. He was a man in his early 60s with silver hair and a reputation for being untouchable. He looked worn down, his tie loosened, his eyes red-rimmed. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Edmund said, his voice grave. He didn't look at Baxter, who was sitting 3 seats down, flanked by his personal attorney. Baxter looked like a cornered animal, sweaty, pale, and twitching. "I didn't authorize your termination," Edmund started, glancing at the federal agent standing by the door. "And the compliance concerns, I was told they were minor procedural errors." "You were told what you wanted to hear," I said, plugging my drive into the main terminal. "But yesterday, when I tried to tell you the truth, you all stood up and walked out." "That is a mischaracterization," Baxter snapped, leaning forward. "We ended a meeting that was wasting company time. We had no idea." "Save it," I cut him off. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I just clicked a file named The Walkout, MP4. The massive screen on the wall flickered to life. It was the video from yesterday, recorded from my laptop's webcam. The audio was crystal clear. "This meeting is over," Baxter's voice boomed from the speakers, dripping with contempt. "We're not wasting another second on this nonsense." The room went deadly silent. On screen, the 12 executives stood up in perfect unison. The door slammed. The lights went out. The video played on for another 10 seconds of silence, showing nothing but the glowing red warning signs of the failed pressure valves on. The projection screen, warnings they had literally turned their backs on. I paused the video. "That," I said, pointing at the frozen image of Baxter's retreating back, "is 12 top-level leaders walking out on a federal safety warning. That is negligence. That is intent." Baxter's attorney whispered frantically in his ear. Baxter's face went from red to a sickly shade of gray. "This is selective editing," Baxter shouted, slamming his hand on the table, though the gesture lacked any real power. "He's a disgruntled employee, he manufactured this. It's a live recording, time-stamped and uploaded to the Federal Oversight Cloud server in real time," Eliza said from the doorway, stepping into the room. "And it matches the testimony of Nadia, your senior technician, who is currently walking us through the altered logs you tried to delete." Edmund turned slowly to Baxter. The look on the chairman's face wasn't anger, it was pure disgust. He realized the ship was sinking and Baxter was the one who had drilled the holes. "You told me the safety reports were clean," Edmund said quietly. You told the board that Mark was unstable. He is, Baxter sputtered. He's the only reason we aren't all being let out in handcuffs right this second, Edmund said, his voice rising. He brought the feds to us before the products hit the children's hospitals. You, on the other hand, Edmund motioned to security, get him out of here. The unraveling was swift and brutal. By lunch, the news had broken. Headline crawlers across national networks read, Federal Raid AT Medical Supplier, Safety Fraud Exposed. Trading on the company stock was halted after a 42% crash. 9 resignations hit HR within 8 hours. Vivian's office door stayed locked until agents escorted her out with a box of personal items. Monroe, the CFO, tried to claim immunity, but the paper trail I'd uncovered showed he had personally authorized the budget cuts that necessitated the fake tests. I watched it all from the quiet of the temporary command post. I wasn't celebrating. There's no joy in watching a company destroy itself, even if it deserves it. It just felt like a heavy weight was finally being lifted off my chest. Late that afternoon, Edmund found me packing up my actual office. Not the quick exit Vivian had tried to force yesterday, but a slow, deliberate packing of my books and tools. He stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame. He looked 10 years older than he had yesterday. I owe you an apology, he said. I didn't look up from the box I was taping. You owe the families in those hospitals an apology. I was just doing the job you hired me for. I didn't know how deep it went, he admitted. I stayed in the clouds. I let Baxter run the ground game, that's on me. Yes, it is, I said, finally meeting his eyes. We want you to stay, Edmund said, and he sounded desperate. We're going to clean house. We need a director of integrity who actually means it. Name your price, double the salary, full autonomy. It was a tempting offer. The money would be life-changing. I could run the department exactly how I wanted. But I looked around the office, the place where Vivian had sneered at me, the place where Baxter had threatened me, the place where Thomas, the man before me, had been broken. I can't, I said. The foundation here is rotten, Edmund. You can fire Baxter, but the culture that let him thrive, that's in the walls. You need to tear it down and start over, but I won't be the architect. I picked up my box. I'm resigning, effective immediately. I walked out to the parking lot. The sun was finally breaking through the gray Indiana clouds. My phone buzzed. It was an email, not from a recruiter or a journalist, but from a major hospital network on the East Coast. They had seen the news. Subject: consulting inquiry message. We don't want a fixer. We want someone who won't lie. Are you available? I smiled, unlocked my car, and tossed the box into the passenger seat. People think whistleblowers want revenge, that we get off on watching things burn. That's not it. I didn't want to ruin anyone's life. I didn't go looking for a war. But I wasn't about to let men in $3,000 suits bet human lives against their quarterly bonuses. I started the engine. The radio was playing a classic rock song my dad used to love. I pulled out of the lot, leaving the chaos, the lawyers, and the shattered egos in my rearview mirror. I was going home to Granger. I was going to sleep for a week. And then I had some real work to do.